Good morning. This is Kimberly with Lickety Stitch Quilts block of the month, working on the Three Sisters pattern, and this is block 12. This is the last block. This one is called Blackbird's Beauty. We will be working on it. This one has inset seams, so there's a little bit something we haven't done yet before in this quilt. As always, you've got your color choices that they give you, the color patterns, or you can choose your own. Today I'm going to be working on my black and white and gray, or black and cream and gray version, I guess. So I've got my pieces cut according to the directions I sent out, and we are going to start today by working on these corner units here. This block goes together really fast, the only tricky part being the inset seams, the Y seams. So we're going to get started. And I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself. I love this block. Full disclaimer, I think it's gorgeous. I would love to do a whole quilt with this block. So I'm going to start with my F and I can't read my own writing. Shocker, right? My F, which is my background, and my D units. And I, in my instructions, said you can cut two 2x8 or one 2x16. We're at the end of the quilt, so my pieces are getting a little bit shorter, so I have two 2x8s of each. So we are just going to put these right sides together and sew them into strip units. So I'm going to end up with two of these. I'm going to press them to the darker fabric, which in my case here is not the background. And then we are just going to cut 2-inch units. So I'm going to press these out, line up my ruler, and cut 2-inch units from each. All we've done here is taken the tiny little squares, the individual squares that they had us cut, and cut them into strips instead to save time. So since I did two 2x8 units, I'm going to get 4 from each. If you did a 2x16 unit, you'll get all 8 of them. And then if you cut them according to the original pattern instructions, you're just going to sew your little squares together to get these 2 units. And then we are going to rotate them to make 4 patches. Easy peasy. So when you get your 4 patches, you're going to end up with 4 of these. And then the next piece that we have is our E piece. And this is a bigger piece. So out of the E we cut 2 by 2 inches by 3 1/2. Sorry, we cut 4 2 inches by 3 1/2, these little pieces here, and we cut one big one of 3 1/2 by 8. So we're going to take that one big one of 3 1/2 by 8, and we are going to take our other D piece of 2 by 8, and we're going to sew them together as such. So just right sides together. I am going to pause and sew that together, and then we're going to subcut that also. So I will be right back. Alrighty. So I've got these sewn together. I'm going to press towards my E fabric because that makes it easier when I sew the other pieces. So super excited to be sewing again. Really happy to have my machine back. Super grateful it waited until the last block to break. Well, not break, but you know, decided to throw a tantrum and need a little extra love. So we are going to take this, I guess that's the way it works, is it couldn't, you know, just be easy the whole way through. And we are going to cut these into 2-inch units. So I'm going to end up with 4 2-inch units. 1, 2. Sorry, it's boring probably to watch me cut, but if I pause the video, sometimes I have to start over, and we're perfect. Okay, so we're going to take these 2 units and set them aside because we need our 4-patch back. Ha, 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 ha. And we're going to take our 4 patches, and the next thing we're going to do is sew them to our 2 by 3 1/2 inch units. So if you haven't squared up your 4 patches, or you want to, these are going to square up to 3 1/2. Sorry, I should have told you that. I'm going to add my e-fabric here. I'm going to give that one a little press first. It got folded. And then you'll see that the next step will be to sew my units that I just subcut out so that we end up with our corner units. I'm going to pause, give these a sew, add this unit in, and then we will go work on our Y-seam pieces. And we'll be right back. Okay, so this next step we're going to cut our C units. You can either cut these. Oh, I should show you. Finished units. So we've got our finished units. I have pressed out again. Pressed out when I added the strip, and then I pressed out again towards this little L unit, just so that they nest well. So these are ready to go. We're going to take our C fabric. You can either cut this using the template. I chose to cut 8 5 3/4 by 2-inch strips. I have them cut in 2s, so I put mine back sides together because that's how I cut them. You can put them right sides together, and I am going to cut them using my ruler and the 45-degree angle. So it's just a parallelogram. I'm going to take my ruler with my 45-degree angle, and I'm going to line it up with the long side, making my corner exactly in the corner of my cut piece, lining up my 45-degree angle along this long back side, and I'm going to cut that corner off. So again, my corner of my ruler lines up exactly with the corner of my fabric. The 45-degree angle is on that back long side, and I just cut that corner out to get a hokey piece. I'm going to rotate my mat all the way around and do the exact same thing. So I'm going to line my corner up in the exact corner of my fabric. I'm going to line my 45-degree angle up here, and you can see, maybe you can see that my ruler, the diagonal of my ruler and the diagonal of my cut side are going the same way, and I'm going to cut that other corner off. That was really an awkward angle to try to do that. Let's try again. Okay, so sorry, I had to check myself there. I thought I got a little off. Okay, we're all good. So what I end up with is a parallelogram, just like my template. You may never use this pattern again. You may be happy to cut that template out. You can make a copy. It doesn't matter. So now I'm going to open my pieces up so that they make this pretty little arrow shape. And I am going to take my B fabric that I have cut in half according to the directions and sew them onto these corners. It does matter, again, so definitely line it up before you sew, but you're sewing on the bottom corners. If you don't want to do inset seams and you followed the alternate cutting directions where we cut the G fabric the same as the B. So you made 1, 2, 3, 4 squares of the G fabric and cut it in half in the same. You would line your G fabric up and do the same thing on the top. So you would line them up like that and sew again. I didn't do that. I'm going to do the inset seams, so I'm just doing this. But if inset seams freak you out, if you hate it, you don't want to do it, you can absolutely cut your G fabric the same as your B fabric, and then sew your B fabric down on the bottom and your G on the top. Let me fold this in half and demonstrate. So you would end up with a unit that looked like that. Does that make sense? If that doesn't make sense, leave me a comment and we'll talk more about it. So I am going to do my B fabric down here on both of these. If you don't want to do inset seams, you can cut your G fabric the same, and then you'll sew a unit like that. I'm going to pause and sew these because we're going to come back and talk about those inset seams. Okay, so the trick with inset seams is the 1/4 inch, and we never sew inside the 1/4 inch. So I've got my pieces sewn. They're happy. I'm going to flip them over to the back side. If you have worked with Y seams or inset seams quite a bit, you may not need to do this. I don't usually mark my seams. I know what they look like on my machine now, where to stop and start. If you haven't ever done it, please mark your seams. You'll be much happier with it. So I'm going to flip them over. This inside the long line of my parallelogram, where I don't have my corner sewn, I am going to take my ruler and I'm going to lay it down so that my 1/4 inch is along the outside. And I'm going to grab my handy dandy marking pen, and just up here at the top, I'm going to mark a line. That's really difficult to see, I think. But I've got a line marked here on my 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to go on the diagonal. I'm going to line my 1/4 inch line here. And if you have a purple thing, they have a 1/4 inch marker. It's really cool. I didn't know that. I don't, so I'm going to use my ruler. And I'm just going to mark my line again so that I can see where they intersect on this line. I'm going to do the same thing with my other piece. I'm going to take that long edge. I'm going to line my 1/4 inch line on my ruler, and I'm just going to mark this top here. I don't have to mark all the way down, because where I really don't want to sew is in the seam allowance. Rotate it, do the same thing on the diagonal. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to sew anywhere past these 1/4 inch lines, and that's going to make a little bit more sense in just a second. I'm going to line these up right sides together. This camera angle is bothering me. There we go. I'm going to line these up right sides together. Okay, I'm going to start here. On this long side is the first seam I'm going to sew. This long side where I'm sewing them together. I'm going to start at my 1/4 inch corner where I have an X. I'm going to start just to the bottom of it. Take a stitch or two, back stitch, and then sew my seam. I am not going to go into the seam allowance. If I have to make a choice, it's better to be a stitch or two short on the sewing than it is to get anywhere into the seam allowance. So start where your 1/4 inch lines intersect. Put your needle down right there. Take a stitch or two, back stitch, not going into the seam allowance, and then sew down. This may be easier if you look at the PDF also, because the pictures show it pretty good. So this isn't hard at all. You just have to make sure that you don't get into that seam allowance with your sewing. I am going to pause to sew it, and I will be back to show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've got my stitching here. It starts at my X. I've sewn down this line. I took a back stitch here because it's going to be an open seam. So when I open this up, It does not sew all the way to the top. My 1/4 inch here, my fat fingers are getting in the way, is open. It doesn't sew all the way to the top. My 1/4 inch is protected. So I'm not going to press it at this point, because what I need to do now is take my G triangle and I'm going to line it up with my diagonal, so it lines up there. I am going to start my sewing, and I am going to sew from the edge all the way down, and I'm going to stop where my seam allowances intersect and backstitch. Depending on how you prefer to sew and what your angle is, you can start again at this intersection, backstitch, and then sew up the line, or you can sew your regular 1/4 inch, watch for your intersection and stop there, backstitch. Again, it's better to stop a little short, a stitch or two short of this seam allowance, this X, than it is to sew in it. If you sew in it, you'll be picking stitches and securing them, and it's just, don't do that. Don't do that. If you're really interested in these Y allowances, these Y seams, and want to work with shapes like this more often, Tallgrass Prairie Studios has a great tutorial online working with these. They're primarily with hexagons, but it's a really good in-depth if you're going to do a lot of these. But again, they're not hard. You've just got to stay out of the seam allowance that we've marked. So again, either start at this X, backstitch and sew your line, or sew your line, get to your X, stop before you hit it, backstitch, and come out. We're going to pause and do that, and then we'll do the other side. Okay, so I've got her sewn. She's halfway in. Again, you'll notice I didn't go all the way to the end. I stopped at my X. I backstitched. We backstitch on these because we're not usually here, like when we go to the edge, we don't backstitch on the edge normally because we're going to come along and we're going to sew that seam in with another seam. On these Y seams, we're never going to cross that seam, so we backstitch to secure it. So now all we do is we grab our other side, we line it up, make sure that this is out of the way. We're going to pull it out so we're not sewing it over. So we've got our other side lined up with our diagonal again, and we're just going to sew. We're going to do the exact same thing. Either start at your X, backstitch and sew the seam, or start at the edge, stop before you get to the X, backstitch to secure, and pull out. So that's a little tricky looking. I've got my sewn piece here. I've got one more seam to secure it together. I just line those ledges up. Make sure I pull that out of the way so I don't have to spend time with the seam ripper. And I'm going to sew my final line. It's a pretty cool unit. If you have done the alternate method and cut your G units like your B units, at this point all you're going to do is line your units up and sew down the middle. So that's easy enough. I'm going to do this. We will come back and it's ready to assemble. Like I said, this block goes really fast. Okay, I've got all of my units sewn. I gave them a good squish with the iron. And I'm ready to assemble. I laid my block out. Again, we end up with a basic 9 patch with our units. I'm going to sew them in rows. I will press, again, just me. When it's an outside row, I press my seams towards the outside. My inside row, I'm going to press towards the center, and then I'll put them all together and be back. This block is stunning in a quilt because it creates a secondary pattern with these diagonal lines that come through. The Y seams seem like a pain, but once you know how to do them, it opens up so many other patterns. Patterns based on octagons and pentagons and tessellating shapes and pin rose tessellations. They're just, it's a neat trick to have in your belt. So if you've got to take some time and practice, that's great. Gosh, if you need help, feel free to reach out. I'm obviously a fan of these. I love doing them. I do them all the time. And I have a lot more fun with my projects because of it. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to pause, put this together, and be back. And it's done. They are fun blocks. Some of them were challenging. I just want to say thanks for going on this journey with me. And I look forward to seeing your completed quilts. If you share a picture with Lickety Stitch's social page, that would be fun to see as they get done. You have 3 setting options that they give you in the instructions. You don't have to follow the color scheme if you chose the 30s repro, for example, colors. The setting that they give you, you don't have to use that. You can use any of the settings for any of the quilts, because the 12-inch blocks are all 12 inches, regardless of what color scheme you went with. And then, of course, if you're super creative and want to do your own setting, that will be interesting to see too. But we are done with the blocks, and now it just got to get them set together and quilted and done, which is sometimes for me the hardest part. It's hard to let a project go, and if it's not done, I don't have to let it go. But I am looking forward to getting these set and gifted, and looking forward to seeing what you do with yours also. If you've got any questions, you can comment on the YouTube videos, and I will see those. You can reach out through the quilt shop, and they will let me know. And that is all. You guys are awesome. Your quilts are going to be beautiful. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to seeing the different colors and how they come together once they're put in. And y'all have a great day. Thank you so much.